Hello everyone and welcome back to another project. In this video I will be working on a tallboy vintage dresser that a customer had commissioned to me, and luckily for me they wanted white, but I was able to convince them to let me choose a different color that would fit this piece a lot better, and you will see what that color is later on in the video. For projects like this, they typically start off the same. I like to disassemble them, get them down to the carcass, and clean them all out with a blower and TSP degreaser while taking off all of the hardware to make sure I get all the dirt behind it. And because I plan on updating the hardware just to give it a bit of a more modern look, I go ahead and do that later on in the video as well. So I've seen a lot of vintage pieces like this where they have a decorative piece across the top, and luckily for me this one is not nailed, screwed, or glued directly to the top, so there is no holes after removing it. It's just these wooden brackets, and luckily the veneer on the top underneath that is in really good shape as well. Once the piece is disassembled and cleaned up, I like to look for any kind of damage, and for this one it looked like it was in really good shape. I just wanted to remove these wheels as the customer didn't really want them anymore, so they come off with just a slight tug and those are gone. They had this trim piece nailed on at the bottom and I didn't really like it. I felt like it wasn't going to fit with the little bit more of a modern look that I was going for, so I opted to remove it and sand it down flush. So I'm using 220 grit sandpaper to scuff up the entire piece because I am going to be painting the body of this, and some of the drawers are going to be painted as well, but I am trying to keep some wood aspects to this piece because I just like to retain some of that wood to keep its character. So you will see kind of how I plan this one out later on. I'm removing all the drawer pulls because these ones are made of a cheaper metal. They're not solid brass, they're just coated. They are very outdated looking to me, so I decided to replace them with something that looks a little more modern but still has that antique feel, and I think it was a really good idea. So this drawer did have some damage. I'm not really sure what happened. It is a solid piece, so I'm not sure really how it got dented in like that. And those are just certain things that you run into during a project that kind of steers your idea in a different direction. And I'm pretty happy with what I came up with. And in this clip right here, I am using my Festival sander with 220 grit sandpaper to sand those drawers down to bare wood. The three main drawers are getting bare wood treatment as well as the top. Once the sanding was all finished up, I moved over to some natural wood filler so I can fill in some of the deeper gouges and scratches in a piece like this. I don't typically like to cover every single thing because I don't want it to look too perfect, because then it'll take away from that vintage feel. So I like to leave behind what I like to call character marks, beauty marks if you will. I just think that it kind of keeps with the vintage feel of it while updating it with a little bit of paint. When sanding down the wood filler, I like to use a 400 grit sandpaper so that way I don't remove too much at once, because some of these gouges are a lot shallower, and if you sand them they will come completely out and you'll have to start over. Also, do not wipe the piece down with water and a rag like I have done in the past, because this stuff is water based and that will also wipe it right out and you'll have to start all the way over. For the stain, I am using an oil-based stain by VERATHANE. This one is called Carrington. What I like about this one is that it has that brown with a little bit of red hue in the background, so it doesn't look completely brown like a walnut, and I think that it's going to go very well with the color that I'm going to paint this dresser. Depending on the piece you're working on and the type of wood that it is, stain usually takes 1 to 2 coats. For this, it took the stain very well. It's very dark and the color is super rich on the first pass, so I decided to just stain everything once, wipe it down, and allow it 24 hours to dry before I put a top coat on it. Once the stain has had at least 24 hours to dry, I move on to using some polyurethane. I use a satin sheen in a water-based formula, so that way it is very easy to apply and the cleanup is very easy as well. You don't need to thin this out with water because it sprays just fine out of my HVLP spray gun. And for this, I think I did about 3 coats with sanding in between each coat with 400 grit sandpaper. One thing to keep in mind when you're scuff sanding after stain, and especially after your first coat of top coat, you really want to just focus on the flat parts where you can feel the roughness on the edges, especially on the top, because the edge is a different color than the top. If you sand it just a little bit too much, you're going to sand through that stain. Then you're going to have to redo the staining process, which can make your project take a whole lot longer than you really want to spend on it. So just be careful around the edges, just stick to the flat surfaces and you should be fine. Now that the top has had a lot of time to dry and cure, I'm taping it off so that way I can paint the body and I don't get any overspray on the top. This is typically the fastest way that I found is to just finish the top if you're going to be doing a wood surface. So that way you can just tape it off, do your paint, finish it, unwrap it, and then you're good to go. The paint that I'm using is cabinet coat. It is enamel acrylic based and it is my favorite paint by far. It's the only paint that I use moving forward from latex paint, and this paint does not require a top coat. As long as you use 2 to 3 coats, it dries really hard and is very scratch resistant. And I'm using a really nice green color. I'm forgetting the color that I use, but I think it's called Laurel Woods. It's a color from Sherwin-Williams, but I got Benjamin Moore to color match that color for me, and it is a really nice dark green, and it's the only green that I use on all of my pieces. When using an HVLP spray gun, you want to go with thinner coats and try not to do heavy full coverage coats just to keep yourself from causing any runs, because then that's going to be a lot more sanding that you have to do, meaning more time into your project, which means that's going to be eating into your profit. So for the 2 top drawers, I'm painting those because one of them had damage, and this dresser does actually have a 3-drawer lowboy dresser that matches it, and I'm not going to show any of the footage to that one because I'm doing all the work off camera, since it's going to be the same steps, same color, same hardware and everything. So it does come with a set. I'll try to get some pictures of it, but I don't think that that's going to happen. Now that the paint is done, this is one of my favorite parts. This is where I get to see all my hard work come together. I get to finally put on those drawer pulls. I did go with a more of a modern brushed brass look, but it still has that vintage vibe. And I am using Howard's Feed and Wax to brighten up and freshen all the wood on the drawers, the sides. And I'd like to use them on the bottom as well, so that way it acts as a wax for the drawers to slide nice and easy. Now that all the waxing of the drawers is done, it's time to just put the rest of the hardware on and put all the drawers back into their places. I like to number them in order so that way they all go back in to the same slots that they came out of. And now let's look at the final piece. Every time I finish a piece in this green color, I am absolutely blown away with the results. The green against that wood tone and the brass handles just ties the whole project together. Really fast, I like to go over all the numbers at the end of each project. This was a commission piece and I did charge $400 for my labor. I subtract $20 to buy the drawer pulls and that leaves me with $380 profit. And I don't include any of the other material because all of that was paid for and built into other projects, so that is all left behind. Thank you so much for sticking with me on this one, and I will see you in the next video.